The title of this talk, in case you're in the wrong room, is a deep dive into Hex. So there's still a chance to go to the machine learning talk. I won't feel bad. And my name is Todd Resudek. I am a senior software engineer at Weedmaps, or WM Engineering. We have a table upstairs, so if you're interested in some free shirts or stickers or want to learn about what we're doing with Elixir, head up there after this talk. Send your friends. You can find me online, GitHub at SuperSimple, or Twitter at SuperSimple without any vowels. And so if you see me around, you may have seen like some of the Hex packages that I've contributed. So the Meetup API being one of them, Alphabetify, or Chameleon, which is a project that I worked on a little bit with Andrea, and with the help of Andrea and Frank Hunleth from the Nerves team. All right, so what is Hex? So basically, Hex is the package manager for the Erlang ecosystem. So it's analogous to what NPM is for Node, or Crates is for Rust, or RubyGems is for Ruby. And the Hex as a system, when you say Hex, you could be referring to one of a few different code bases. So first off is the CLI, Hex CLI. And so that's what you have installed on your machine. If you type mix local hex, that's what's installed. You could be talking about Hex PM, which is the website that you go to, or the API that's used to communicate from the website to the client. Hex Docs, which is the hosting site for documentation. Those are all static. Or a new one that Wojtek just released, which is called Hex Core, which is sort of the interface wrapper for all things Hex. So we've starting to see some cool projects come in that are using Hex Core already. For the purposes of this talk, I'm mainly going to be talking about the Hex CLI. All right, so where does Hex fit in to the ecosystem? This is a great image that I grabbed from a Successories poster. Don't ask me what it said. But you can look at like the iceberg on the top as being all of the mix commands that are built in. So anytime you type in mix depth dot something, that is probably your most common interface into the Hex ecosystem. Mix depth get, for instance, something that you'd use a lot. So that calls into Hex. What's below the water is all the stuff that I work on, which is the Hex client, or Hex PM. So where did it come from? This country, Norway. Just kidding, Sweden. I swear that is Sweden. Don't ask me where it is on a map. So other great things that came from Sweden, dynamite, the Celsius scale, and the 3-point seatbelt. And this is the guy that made it, a genuine Swede. His name's Eric Meadows Johnson, and the first release of Hex was December of 2013. So pretty early on. The first version of Elixir, at least that I could find, was 0.50, and that was in May of 2012. Yeah, Hex has been around for almost 5 years. So what is the role of Hex in the ecosystem? So obviously, like the Elixir and the Erlang ecosystem covers a lot of ground. And I like to think of Hex as sort of the role player in all this. This is Scottie Pippen, if you didn't know. And so probably one of the greatest basketball players of all time. But he also was on a team with Michael Jordan. So no one would ever say the best player on the Chicago Bulls was Scottie Pippen, although his contributions are immense. And so this is the way I kind of think about Hex, is that it's something that literally every Elixir programmer uses and a lot of Erlang programmers use, but it's kind of behind the scenes, and it's very relatively simple and reliable. So it really doesn't make a nuisance of itself, and so unfortunately you barely notice it. So you can think of the Elixir Lang as being sort of the Michael Jordan. So if you're contributing to that, or you're the guy that works on that, really cool, get the shoe deal. Hex, Elixir Lang would be nothing without Hex. So at least to me. So So yeah, I'm actually like, even though it's not a really, maybe a super high profile project, I am like actually genuinely very excited about Hex, if you can't tell. So, so I mentioned like its other analogs in other ecosystems. So one way you could compare Hex to like other package managers would be like how many packages are available. So Hex has, at last count, right around 7,000 packages. RubyGems has around 9,500. So just to give you like an idea of like a trajectory, 6 months ago, Hex had 6,000 packages, and RubyGems had 9,200. So in that last 6 months, you've seen 300 new RubyGems, but you've seen 1,000 new Hex packages. And like given the size of the Ruby community versus the size of the Elixir community, I think like having 70%, having that 70% difference, plus having just so many fewer engineers working on it, kind of says a lot about the trajectory of those two communities. Crates, the ecosystem for, or the package manager for Rust, has about 18,000 now. NPM, that's the big boy. So their website says greater than 500,000. The last count I saw was north of 680,000. So I think you could draw like a lot of conclusions from that as to like what are the value of any given package per se. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of the joke that tells itself. Honestly, NPM is a really, really good package manager, and a lot of the security vulnerabilities that are in package managers affect NPM more than they affect the rest of us. And so it gives us a good sort of a guinea pig of closing our security vectors in Hex. And also, like the JavaScript ecosystem is different in the sense that every little thing, left pad, is a library, whereas it's not as common in other languages to make libraries out of like rather trivial functions. So, so why is everybody here to learn about Hex? So I can give you a couple reasons. So working faster. So since Hex is something you depend on, to do your work every day, knowing more about how it works can, maybe improve your speed. You could prevent issues. So it could prevent you from getting stuck in places where you have dependencies. Or if you are having issues, I will show you some of how Hex works so that you can, possibly debug why those issues are happening. And before I go a little bit further, I just want to define a couple of terms. So when you hear me say package, that's a library. So that would be an entire library. If I say release, that's a specific version of a library. So package has many releases. So what is the anatomy of a Hex package? So this is basically it. It looks a lot like any other Mix app, with the exception of maybe one extra file being the license file. So if you release a Hex package under any specific open source license, or closed source license, I guess, it's required to have this license markdown file in there with the entire text of the license. And to give you an idea of what the shape of your Mix EXS file is for a Hex package, this is basically what it looks like. I don't expect you to read all that, but I want to cover a couple of the specific details in there. So if you look in the project section of that, you'll see a version. The versions in Hex are required to be in semver or semantic versioning format. So you'll see this one is 010. So just be aware of that. Next is the description. So this is the description of what your Hex package does. And so this is actually really important because this is one of the few pieces of metadata in a Hex package that's searchable. So when you're looking for a library that serves a specific purpose, most likely you're going to go to Hex PM or use the CLI to search for specific terms, Elasticsearch or what have you, or Postgres, for instance. So the description is one of the few pieces of metadata that's actually being searched when you do that. So the next section is the depth section. So your Hex package is a dependency, but your dependency can have other dependencies. And what I really wanted to point out here is that you can load those dependencies from different sources. So it's most common probably to load them from Hex or the Hex PM website, which would be like the top line there, which you're probably used to. But you could also load them directly from a Git repo or from a local path. And so if you're developing your first Hex package or developing your first release and you want to test it out with real code, instead of publishing it and then bringing it in from the live ecosystem, you can just inject or call that dependency into your project using the path. So inside of the package section of the mixexs file is the name. So this is the name of your application or the name of your library. And this is the only other piece of metadata that's searchable. So the name and the description. So it's really important if you're going to, when you fill out this information for your Hex package, that these things make sense or that they would make sense to somebody that's searching for your package. And this is optional, but organization. So you can set this inside your mixexs file if you're publishing this to your private Hex org. And I'll talk a little bit more about orgs later. But just notice that sometimes you'll see a Hex package that'll have that. Or if you have a private org, you'll need to put that into your EXS file. All right, so you're all here. So what Hex commands should you know? So first one, mix hex info. So type that in, and you're going to get back some data about what Hex version you have installed, and as well as how it was built, what it was built with. And so, why is that useful? Well, let's say you're having a problem, or you're seeing a specific bug on your machine, but your coworker isn't. It could be that you have two different versions of Hex installed. And so mix hex info would just let you know that, say, oh, you're on 0.18.1, I'm on 0.18.6. You should download the newer version, see if that fixes your problem. So along the same lines, you can add a package name to the end of that. So mix hex info package. And that will give you specific information about that Hex package. So in this case, what is it, Postgres? So it will tell you, well, the first line is the config. So you put that in your config. You can just copy and paste that into your config to add that dependency. In this case, it also shows releases. So all the 1.0 releases of Postgres have been retired. So it'll show you all those, as well as licenses, contributors, links, information that you'd want to know. And if you add the version to that package, it will give you even more specific information about that specific release, including its dependencies. So these are packages that it depends on. All right, so I mentioned searching before. So you can search on Hex PM, the website, but you can also search right in the CLI that you have installed. So mix hex.search and then your search term. So in this case, I've searched for alpha, and it's going to bring up 10 results. So like I said, that's based on the name of the package and the description of the package. And so in this case, I am authed to a specific organization. So the left-hand column shows what organization that package exists in. If it's blank, then that means it's a publicly available library. Kitty cat picture. Where's Tender Love? All right. So fetching documentation. So this is, I think, one of the coolest things you can do. You can take away from this is being able to fetch documentation right from your terminal. So there's 3 commands to do this. So fetch, online, and offline. Let me show you those. So mix hexdocs online package. So you just type that in, type in the package name, and that's automatically just going to pop open your browser with the documentation in the browser for you, right from the hexdocs website. So when you're fetching documentation, there's just a couple things to know about that. So EEX, Elixir, XUnit, IEX, Logger, and Mix are all going to retrieve. So when you type that command in, it's going to automatically retrieve or show you the link for the version that matches your current Elixir version. So if you type in fetch Elixir and you have 151 installed, it's going to bring up the link for 151 rather than the latest version. So if you type that command from inside of a Mix project, it's going to assume you want the version that you have installed in that Mix project. So it's going to open that. So again, it's not necessarily the latest. It's the one that is most pertinent to the context that you're in. And otherwise, it defaults to the latest version. So I'll show you that real quick. So mix hex.docs fetch. And let's see. So this is outside of the context of a Mix project. So it gives you a warning. It says, I don't know what you want me to fetch. So if you change your directory, so in this case, I'm inside of a Mix project, it says, OK, mix hex.docs fetch. It's going to fetch all the documentation for every dependency that you have in that Mix app. So now you have it on your machine. So if you're going offline, let's say you have a commute like in a train or a plane ride or something, you want to go through documentation. Exciting, I know. That's one command. You've got it all installed on your machine. So if you look down the list, you'll see like docs fetched on the top one, docs already fetched. That means I already had it downloaded on my machine. And then there's one in there, JSX, which couldn't find the docs for. So you'll see that occasionally either for an older package where the docs were never published, a library owner that really hates you and never made docs in the first place, or probably most commonly it's for like Erlang packages that you're using in Elixir where they didn't include docs. So if you add the package name, just like before, it is more specific, so you don't have to be within the context of a Mix app to do this. So mix hex docs fetch and a package name. So if you're in the context of a Mix app, it's going to assume the version is the version you have installed in that Mix app. If not, it's going to install the latest version. And so one thing you'll see here is where it downloads those packages or those documents to. And so the beginning of that is your home/hex. So that's called your Hex home folder. So everybody that has the Hex CLI installed on their machine has a .hex directory in their home folder right now. And so if you dig around in there, you can see that's a lot of where the Hex CLI lives. So you'll find some interesting stuff. But in this case, there's a docs directory inside of there, and that's where all these docs that you're fetching are going to live. All right, so offline package. OK, so let's say you want to view the docs for a specific package, but you are not online currently, so you don't have an internet connection, or you want to fetch them and then view them right away. So hex docs offline and then package will check and see if you have that documentation in your Hex home folder already, and if so, it'll open it. If not, it will go out to fetch them and then open them right away. So this is kind of like doing a fetch and an online at the same time. So typing that command in, stream data, you'll see if you can see in the browser location bar, that's actually from my local file system. So I mean, this is great if you've already fetched all the documentation and you want to quick look up some documentation for stream data, which is a great property-based testing tool. I heard it's going to be in 1.7. All right. So this is great. So you don't have to find your Hex folder. You don't have to manually surf around for that. So and like I said, again, if you don't add a version number to this, it's going to assume the latest. So it's going to open the latest version or context-aware version. All right, next section. Sorry if I'm working kind of quickly. I do want to share like a bunch of this stuff with you guys. And if there's any questions, I'm really happy to answer them after the talk, either out in the hallway or elsewhere on Twitter. So before you can do a lot of things with Hex, you need to set up a user. So usernames must be at least 3 characters. Passwords must be at least 7 characters. And usernames are only lowercase letters, uppercase letters, 0 through 9, underscore, a dash, or a period. So those are the only rules for setting up a Hex user account. Some names are reserved, though. So you can't have the Hex username me, or Hex, or Hex PM, Elixir, Erlang, or OTP. You can ask Eric why, but those are reserved. All right, so let's get started. I want to register a user. So Hex user register, add some information like my chosen username, password, boom. So the first thing you're going to create is an account password. When you see account, that means your account on Hex PM. So that's your online Hex account password. And then you'll also have a local password. So your Hex user, same username. Locally, you're going to be entering a local password. When you go on Hex PM or do anything that requires like online calls, that's your account. So there's 2 sets of keys and 2 different passwords. All right, let's say I forgot my password. My password isn't secure for some reason. You can reset password with this command, reset password local. And that's just going to bring up a prompt for you to set your new password, and mission accomplished. So same thing, but for your account, reset password account. And this is going to force you to go online to, it's going to give you a link and force you to go online to reset your password. So keep in mind when you do this, so if you ever have to do this, it may invalidate any of your locally stored API keys. So you may suddenly not be able to fetch packages or publish packages anymore. And so if that happens, mix hex user auth. So what this will do is regenerate all of your locally stored API keys. So just type that in, and now you've got all fresh keys with your new account tied to your new account and password. All right, so we're on the subject of keys. Talk about those. Mix hex user key list. And so you do this to see all the API keys or all the keys that you have installed in your local machine. So in this case, I have some for my regular user, for my public account. I've got some for my personal organization, some for my Weedmaps organization. So debugging-wise, like why can't I pull down our organization's package? Well, maybe check this out. Maybe you haven't authorized that org yet. So if you don't see that key in your list, that's possibly one of the reasons why. So let's say you want to get rid of one of those keys. So, oh, I left that job, or we don't have that organization anymore, for instance. So hex user key revoke key name, and that will pull that key from your config. At the same point, if you've decided to delete your account per se, revoke all, it will just get rid of all those API keys for you. So good for like clean start. My machine's wiped, or I changed all my passwords, and I just want to reauth everything. You can just revoke all your keys, and then every time you need to authorize, it will ask you to do that. So, yeah. So all of that stuff that I've shown you is in your config file. So if you go into your Hex home folder, and you'll have a file in there called hex.config that stores all of that information. So that's where all of your API keys live, your username lives, as well as some prefs. So if you just type in mix hex.config, it'll show you your specific configuration. So in this case, all I have in this config is my username. And that's actually really common. So most likely, if any of you type this in now, all you're going to see back is your username. But there are a couple of other configs that you should probably be aware of. So I'll just show you real quick what a config file looks like if you browse that. So you see like the top line there is my username. And then anything that starts with a $, so you see like repos, write key, API read key, for instance. So those are the ones that Hex is using internally. So $, that's internal usage. Not $, means that's something that you set up yourself. And so there are actually 8 keys that you can set up that Hex will look at. So API URL, offline, unsafe HTTPS, unsafe registry, HTTP proxy, HTTPS proxy, HTTP concurrency, and HTTP timeout. So when you are adding a config to that file, or configuration, so like username was one of those, these are the other 8 config keys that Hex will actually look at. And so by and large, you'll never actually have to look at these. Most of these are for if you've set up your own mirror or you set up your own private way of hosting Hex packages, you'll have to use these. But I would say the last 2 are worth knowing. So HTTP concurrency and HTTP timeout have gotten people out of a jam before. So one issue that you'll run into on occasion is that, let's say your internet connection is relatively poor for whatever reason, and you're pulling down dependencies and you get through half of them and then all of a sudden Hex quits, it times out. The Hex timeout is set by default to 60 seconds. And so if you find yourself just on a particularly poor connection or temporarily or long term, one thing that is good to try is to set your HTTP timeout to a higher value. At the same time, HTTP concurrency can also fix a lot of problems. So by default, it's set to concurrently fetch eight packages simultaneously. Occasionally, there are issues either related to your network or to the specific dependencies in building that tree, where that concurrency value is just too high. And so setting that to a number below 8 can help you out. Or if you're really, really impatient and YOLO, you could set it to a really high number. Generally, 8 is a great place to be. But if you run into specific problems with packages timing out or errors in downloading dependencies, those are two of the keys that I think are worth knowing. So to set those, it's really easy. Just hex.config, the key name, and then the value name. So HTTP timeout, 120, and that's it. So if you type that in, and then now I've typed out hex config, you'll see I have an HTTP timeout value set in there as well. And OK, so you were at Starbucks. The internet connection was particularly poor. You set the timeout to a high value. Now you're back at home where you've got decent internet. You can just delete that specific setting. So give it the key name, -- delete, and now your config is back to where it was before. All right, next section I'm calling housekeeping. And that's, what's her name? Alice. Ann B. Davis from the Brady Bunch. And so housekeeping. So this is like, if you do this stuff, I mean, you are like MVP. You are employee of the month, basically, if you're doing this stuff. But I think you should. So mix hex.outdated. All right. So every once in a while, it is actually really, really good to type this command in. And so what this is going to show you is dependencies that you have in your app that have since been retired. So in this case, that are outdated. So in this case, I've got Postgres installed. It says, OK, here's your current version, the latest version in red, warning, and then update possible, yes. So it means that the way you've required that, is you've allowed minor version updates. So cool, update is possible. Good idea to update this package now. All right, so if you add a specific package name, so you're worried about a specific package, you can add that to the end. So in this case, you mix outdated and then package name. What it's going to tell you is what the other dependencies you have installed that depend on that package, and if an update's available, or if you could update it safely. So in this case, like Ecto is requiring 0.12, so it's only allowing patch level updates. So this would be a problem. All right, and the other one for housekeeping is the Hex Audit. And so this one will tell you if you have any retired packages in your dependency tree. So in this case, I have alphabetify 010, and it's been retired. And so I'll talk about retirement in a second, but this should be a red flag. So the developer in this case has retired the package for a reason, and your application is depending on it. So this would be a really good time to take care of that. All right. So this is where all the cool stuff is, publishing. So in order to publish a package, round of applause, anybody here published a package to Hex? Wow, I see. I'm going to estimate maybe 300,000 people just clapped. 30% of the crowd. And so good for you. So this requires you to be a registered Hex user. So we talked about registering a user. When you publish, it generates and publishes the documents by default. So like I said before, when you couldn't pull those docs down, you actually kind of have to go out of your way not to publish documentation with your Hex package, which I think is a great feature, great idea. The documentation in Elixir is awesome, and so this, by forcing you to publish documents by default with your package, I think really helps keep the ecosystem as great as it is already. If you're publishing it privately, if you don't put the organization in your mix.exs file, you can just add the -- organization flag, and so that will publish it just to your org, so it won't be available to the public. And one other note when you're publishing is if your dependency or your library depends on pre-release dependencies, so in a semver it would be major minor patch -pre. So if you are publishing a non-pre-release library that has dependencies in it that are pre-release, Hex will throw an error. It won't let you publish that package. So just keep an eye on that. If you do want to publish a package that has pre-release dependencies, you can release yours under a pre-release version. All right, package naming. So I want to add a library. What am I going to name it? So I'm going to read this verbatim because I think that it's actually really, really important. And I want to just make sure that it gets the gravitas that it deserves. So avoid using offensive or harassing package names, nicknames, or other identifiers that might detract from a friendly, safe, and welcoming environment for all. And so I'll just reiterate that the Elixir ecosystem is and should be a very friendly place and a very safe place for everybody to be. And so when you're naming your package, don't be a dick about it. Just, name it something that is, relatively innocuous, descriptive, funny, but don't do anything that, is harmful or might be harmful to somebody else. So naming conventions. So this is not a hard and fast rule, but generally when you're adding functionality to an existing package, use that package's name in your package name. So if you're adding, auth to, a specific package, it would be that package's name _auth, for instance. And so that's a good indication to somebody that, for instance, ecto enum is a library that we use to add enums to the ecto library. Makes sense. When you see that oh, this is also going to depend on ecto. Avoid namespace conflicts with existing packages. So because of the way Hex is set up, everything is in the global namespace. And so if you are adding auth to plug, let's say, you would want to name your package plug.auth instead of plugauth, for instance. Vice versa. Name it plugauth rather than plug.auth to avoid the namespace that plug is already taking. It's common when you're porting a library from another ecosystem to add EX to the name. I think we're kind of seeing that less and less, but I think in the first couple of years, if you were coming from the Ruby community, you were used to seeing a specific Ruby gem. It was really common to see it with the same name in Hex with an _EX at the end or EX _. But I think as Elixir is kind of coming into its own, you were kind of seeing that less and less. So for instance, the faker gem in Ruby is just called faker in Elixir as well. Names are first come, first serve. So what does that mean? It means that I have a package called Meetup, right? I don't work for Meetup. I don't have the trademark to Meetup. I don't even know anybody that works at Meetup. But they didn't publish a Hex package, and I did. So I have, I have reserved the name Meetup. Having said that, squatting is not allowed. So I'm sure we've all come to this point where we're like, man, I really want to make a GitLab API library. So I'm going to just throw up some junk code right now called GitLab. And so that way I'll have the name of the GitLab library. And I'll get around to it next week, and then next month, and then 6 months from now, for instance. So squatting is not allowed. So if you try to publish a trivial package, it can and hopefully will be removed from the community. So yeah, don't squat on names. Wait until you actually have the library done before you publish something. All right, so you've got your library all put together, mix hex publish. It's going to throw out some prompts, including a link to the code of conduct. I'd really recommend using that, or looking at the code of conduct. TLDR, don't be a jerk. If you want to skip the confirmation step on this, just add the -- yes flag. So when you do this, it automatically checks the package size. So there's a restriction for the size of your compressed package and your uncompressed package. So keep that in mind. It also checks for typo squatting. So one issue that's existed in other ecosystems is that somebody will name a package very, very similarly to an existing package and use that as an attack vector. So they might, instead of Postgres, they might name it Postgres and then actually have malicious code in there. When you try to publish that package, Hex will automatically check using a Levenstein distance with existing packages. So if your name is too close to the name of an existing package, that will fail. That publish will fail. And that, just to keep in mind, that doesn't apply to private repos. So if you have your own private organization, you can name it whatever you want. That Levenstein distance doesn't happen on those. All right, so now you've published your package. Oh, so you get that feeling, oh, I've made a huge mistake. You realize, I forgot something. So one of the great security features of Hex is that releases are immutable. So you've released something, it's going to exist in that state forever. It can't be unpublished. So think of what happened with the left pad issue in the Node ecosystem is everybody had this dependency. The publisher decided to unpublish left pad, so now you can't build your system anymore. So releases in Hex are immutable, caveat being for 1 hour. So after you've published, you have up to 1 hour to republish for that release. If it's after an hour, you have to retire your package and go to the next version. So mix hex publish revert version, it will take it down. So like I said, you only have an hour to do that. Otherwise, it's there forever. So if you've noticed errors, but they're only in your docs, don't worry about it. You can actually republish docs for any semantic version at any point. So if you've decided to go back and clean up your docs, from 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago or what have you, that can be done at any time. So that doesn't have the same 1 hour limitation. All right, retirement. This guy, Yogi Berra. All right. So retiring packages was added in 0.15, so it's almost 2 years ago. This signifies that a package is no longer recommended. So the maintainer or the owner of the package has deemed it not worthy. So when you retire something, you have to include a valid reason. And so there's 5 valid reasons: rename, deprecated, security invalid, or other. And there's also the option of adding a message. So when you retire a package, you'll just type in, mix hex retire package name. Then you have to give it the reason. In this case, other -- message and then a string. And so when we did that Hex Audit and you saw other and then this package has bugs, that's where this comes from. And so it's really important as the maintainer of a library to keep this up. So if there is an old version that you don't want to support anymore, or let's say you've just abandoned it completely, I think it's really great to help the community by saying it's been retired. And previously you would look at oh, when was the last update made on GitHub? Oh, okay, this package is active or not active, or what's the latest version, or when was this published, for instance. This kind of takes out the guessing game. At the same token, you can unretire packages. So if you've retired it too early, decide to take it out of retirement, Michael Jordan, you can do that. is a little insight into organizations. And so these were added just last year, $7 a month, best money you can spend. And so this will give your organization private packages. You can put proprietary information in there and have it accessible to your whole team. And sorry, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip a couple of things. These slides will all be available online for you guys to check out later. So I would say, like, if you are interested in Hex, and obviously, like, if you're here today, you are, say one thing you could do is, get involved. So either star or follow the repos on GitHub, submit an issue. So if you see a bug, submit it. We'd love to fix it for you. Open a pull request to fix a current issue. So go on the current repo. There's a couple of active issues open. Glad to see your pull request or help you work on that. And lastly, just want to thank the people that brought me here, Weedmaps. Thank Jim for inviting me to speak. And like I said, the slides will all be available at this URL, humid.cloud/hex. Thanks.